As we get closer to the trade deadline, NBA trade rumors have been spreading like wildfire, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the potential of Donovan Mitchell getting traded to the Knicks. According to Greg Sylvander, an insider of the Miami Heat, if Donovan Mitchell were to axe out of Utah, the Heat or the Knicks would be his destination. So would Donovan Mitchell actually demand a trade to the Knicks? And if he did, should the Knicks trade for him? Let's talk about it. For starters, Donovan Mitchell asking out of Utah seems very plausible. While Donovan Mitchell does play for a winning team in the Utah Jazz, the Jazz are highly unlikely to ever win a championship or even go to the finals anytime soon. The Jazz have consistently been one of the top teams in the West ever since Donovan Mitchell was drafted, but they always seem to peak in the second round. Even last year, when the Jazz managed to finish with the best record in the NBA, they still lost to the Clippers in the second round. Now there's many factors as to why the Jazz are perennial underperformers in the playoffs, but the main reason is the lack of talent around Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell is a great player, but generally, you need at least two all-star level players to go deep in the playoffs, and the Jazz only have one. It's a shame for Mitchell because he's truly one of the best playoff performers in the league. He averages 29 points per game in the playoffs for his career, including 32 points a game last year. But a supporting cast of Rudy Gobert, Joe Ingles, and Jordan Clarkson just simply isn't cutting it in the tough Western Conference. And a team like the Utah Jazz are in the same predicament that a lot of small market teams find themselves in, where they're now too good to draft another star talent, but also don't play in a market that attracts free agents. The Jazz are a team that always picks in the high 20s, and it's extremely difficult to draft a star that deep in the draft, and Utah has never been a destination for free agents. After realizing that the Jazz front office is incapable of putting a good enough team around him, it's possible that Donovan Mitchell wants out. Are the Knicks a realistic destination? Very possible. Not only do we have that source, but Mitchell has been linked to the Knicks in possible trade scenarios before. It does make sense as New York is his hometown. Donovan grew up in Westchester County, and his dad is currently an executive for the New York Mets, so he definitely has ties to New York. Additionally, Donovan Mitchell has a strong relationship with assistant coach Johnny Bryant, who the Knicks hired last season, so Mitchell requesting a trade to the Knicks does sound realistic. Now, should the Knicks trade for him? Let's discuss the pros and cons. The first major pro of a Donovan Mitchell trade is that acquiring Donovan could make the Knicks a formidable team in the East. Donovan Mitchell is one of the top players in the NBA, and as stated before, a great playoff performer. If the Knicks could trade for Donovan and surround him with some good pieces, the Knicks could certainly be one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference, and he's still just 25 years old, meaning he's likely to get even better as he hasn't even hit his prime yet. And that brings us to our next pro. Trading for Donovan Mitchell gives the Knicks a wider window to contend. Because he's so young, Donovan Mitchell gives the Knicks at least a 6 to 7 year window to build around him. This would make him a better target than another star like Damian Lillard, who's already over 30 years old and only has a few years left of elite play. And because he's only 25, he can be a part of the young core that the Knicks are trying to build. So trading for Donovan Mitchell sounds exciting, but now let's talk about the cons. The reality is, acquiring Donovan Mitchell is going to cost the Knicks a monster package. This isn't NBA 2K where you can just force a team into a completely unfavorable trade. Even if Donovan asks out, the Jazz aren't trading for him without a package they really like. Not only is he a top 20 player, but he's got 3 years left on his contract, which gives the Jazz a leverage in trade talks. For starters, there's no universe where the Knicks trade for Donovan Mitchell and don't include RJ Barrett. The number one asset teams that are trading a star look for is a good young talent, and RJ is the best young player the Knicks have. And they're likely going to also want a multitude of future first round picks. Now, I'm sure Knicks fans would love to give Utah Julius Randle instead of RJ, but with how much Julius Randle has underperformed this year, and with the money he's about to make in the coming years, I doubt Utah would want him in return. If the Knicks package RJ, multiple players, and draft picks, it's going to be tough to build around Donovan, which feels like the Carmelo trade all over again. Donovan Mitchell can become a free agent in 2025, and the Knicks can hope that Donovan is a free agent by then so they could just sign him without giving up assets. But on the other hand, Donovan likely doesn't hit the free agent market should he demand a trade because, as stated earlier in the video, the Miami Heat are also a destination for him. If the Knicks bank on Donovan Mitchell hitting free agency, that could easily not work out because the Heat could trade for him so they can lock him up long term. For the Heat, a Donovan Mitchell trade makes a lot more sense for them compared to the Knicks. The Heat already have two all-stars between Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. Not only that, they could easily make a Donovan Mitchell trade centered around Tyler Hero, a young player averaging 21 points per game that the Jazz would want, Kyle Lowry, and a bunch of future first-round picks to make a trade work. And this trade would allow the Heat to add Donovan Mitchell while still having Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler and becoming an even bigger threat to win the championship. You can't say the same thing for a New York Knicks team that's swimming in mediocrity with a 21-21 record. Unless the Knicks have another trick up their sleeve to pair Donovan with another star, a Donovan Mitchell trade makes little sense. For example, the LA Clippers traded Shai Gilgeous-Alexander along with a boatload of future first-round picks for Paul George. But that was only because they knew Kawhi was coming too. There is no way the Clippers make that move for just Paul George. That trade was pretty much for PG-13 and Kawhi. What star player are the Knicks pairing with Donovan Mitchell if he gets traded here? It sure as hell isn't Julius Randle, who's fallen off a cliff after getting maxed out by the Knicks. The Knicks might be better off building a contender similar to what the Heat did, so that way if they do make a blockbuster trade, they're pairing him with another star player. Anyway guys, that's the pros and cons. Do you think the Knicks should make a trade for Donovan Mitchell if he demands a trade? Tell me in the comments. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and check out some of my other Knicks content. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.